Next up, we have a brisk chat with Mr. Rajdeep Sardesai, senior journalist, author, and news anchor at India Today, who has over 2.5 decades of rich experience in fields of both TV reporting and digital journalism. Welcome, Mr. Sardesai.
Thank you very
Interviewing
much.
him is our
But I want to correct you. I've done, I'm going to say that I've done 33 years in journalism, but it's been basically print and television. Digital is a world that I am only tentatively watching, maybe tiptoeing into, but by and large, still looking at from an outsider's perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you for correcting me, sir.
No. That's just to say, just to set it on record.
Sure. Interviewing him is our associate editor, Anirban Roy Chaudhary. Thank you once again. Over to you, Anirban.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Devashish, and good evening, sir.
Good evening, Anirban.
Yeah, a little intro that I would like to give. I know Devashish has already introduced you, but to put my discussion into context, I would like to give an introduction. I mean, a trained lawyer who was practicing in Bombay High Court decided to take 1 year break. 1 year break happened to be Times of India and journalism. And that's how we have Rajdeep Sardesai, who then went to Delhi to actually set up another newspaper or an office for the newspaper, and ended up meeting a print journalist, ended up meeting Pranoy Roy, whom he says he just watched on television till then. But Pranoy Roy welcomed him and he became a television journalist. Why I give this introduction is because, you have seen print and then you have moved to television when television was just starting. Today we have digital, which I would say is just starting in a big way. What's your immediate reaction to this digital media when it comes from a newsman or from journalist point of view?
That's an interesting question, Anirban, because it takes me back to when I was making the shift from print to television. Yeah. I remember I was 29 when I made the shift. I'd done 7 years at the Times of India and a few months at the Telegraph. And I remember most of the people around me would tell me, why are you doing TV? TV is entertainment. Really, do you really want to do TV? Print is so much more serious. Print is real journalism. Why would you go into TV? And I almost bought their argument because, being someone who had grown up on newspapers, who had worked with a newspaper, and I still love newspapers, it wasn't an easy choice to make. And therefore, I can see why, let's say, people much younger than me who today are in their 20s, who perhaps are faced with that same choice. Let's say they've done 6 years in television or 7 years in television and now are told, do you want to switch to digital? Some of them are joining, some of them are hesitant because the general impression that my generation has is that digital also is very cluttered, very crowded. Can you really do meaningful journalism? So I think, it's ironical that the same criticism that was made about television in 1994-95 is at times made about digital as well. At the same time, the same advantages about television then, that it's a completely new space, you could perhaps experiment, do something new, is what is exactly being said about digital. That, television is now becoming just noise, while digital is where you can perhaps really see your creativity being expressed. So for a generation, I may be the wrong generation now for digital. So whatever as I do in digital will perhaps be as a 57, 56-year-old looking at it perhaps as a new adventure. But, it's wonderful to see a lot of young people experimenting and doing creative stuff on digital, because I think that in a way will take hopefully journalism also out of the kind of, I wouldn't say ICU, but certainly out of the, there's a certain dormant, it's like a dormant volcano at the moment. The lava needs to come out again and maybe it'll come out in digital.
Correct. Your show during the election, elections on my plate, it was one of the standout show, as you said, it was like an ocean of content. But your show came out as an island. So and that show was very popular on digital platforms, not only on your channel, but also on Facebook and YouTube and other social media platforms. At times when you were on the field, did television journalist Rajdeep Sardesai speak with digital journalist Rajdeep Sardesai sometimes, and was there a conflict somewhere?
Look, after doing television for 27 years, my instincts are that of a television journalist. So I look for imagery, I look to, I think visually, which is very important for a television journalist. And I think of my storyline. I think a digital journalist perhaps has other instincts, which I don't have. But yes, for example, I was doing, I would do the occasional Facebook Live while I was, say, interviewing someone for TV. And I recognize the importance that while you're doing, let's say, a 45-minute TV show, you should have enough of elements that can be broken down into, let's say, 3-4 minutes that can eventually also serve the digital needs of a news channel or a news channel's digital platform. So I think you will find increasingly, and many of us are already doing that, is that we go to do a TV story, but are also slowly starting to think, what out of this story can I send for digital? Is there a soundbite, or is there a conversation that I've done? More importantly, or a location that I've gone to, where I could also contribute to the digital world. What will, earlier we used to think as to, what will, I don't like to use the word sell, but what will attract the viewer. Correct. Now it is what will go viral. And when I was in print, it was what headline will grab the attention of the reader. So let's not kid ourselves. Whether you are in print, whether you are in TV or digital, your ultimate goal is to maximize your viewership or your readership or your digital reach. That's what you really want. And therefore, even when I went out to the field to do an elections on my plate, I think deep down inside was, what is it that I really can show that maybe people will want to watch. So I think that's important, particularly in this crowded market.
Great. You went on record many times to say, whenever you were asked about one moment you were very proud of, you say that setting up CNN IBN and making it big is one moment that you always felt great about. If you were to say CNN IBN for digital, I mean a digital venture, where you said you started it, when you all started CNN IBN, it started from just one chair. And similar situation, what would excite you most about digital today? Where you're starting a new digital channel.
I think I must confess, what would excite me is if I could bring a sort of, marry meaningful journalism to creativity. I think that is an important intersection that one would like to be on. I think one needs more meaningful journalism, which is hopefully a little bit more in-depth as well. But one also needs to bring in creative elements that will keep the viewer hooked. Let's be clear, we are not in the 1980s when I joined this profession where there was no other competition out there. Now that, in a multimedia world where people have this constant attention deficit and people are being bombarded by all kinds of media, I think it's important to find spaces where you can create meaningful journalism that's also creative. So maybe, let's my two great passions are sport and elections. Is there a election website that can be created? We are, heading into 2024 in the next 2.5 years. Can we create India's biggest and best election? I wouldn't say biggest, but best election website, which genuinely is able to combine data with reportage, with analysis. That's one. And the second is sport, which is a great passion. Can we create India's biggest fan zone? I mean, a website that, again, is able to connect the fan to, let's say, the sporting arena in a truly, in a more interesting manner. So I think digital offers that because of the fact that your entry barriers are much lower. You can enter the space without having to invest as much in terms of your invest as much as you would to set up a TV channel. Someone asked me today, Rajdeep, let's set up a TV channel. I'll say no. But if someone really came and told me, let's try and do, as you said, a CNN IBN on digital, I would jump at it. Nobody's come to me, but if somebody did, I would jump at it because I think there is much that we can learn from our experiences that we can now marry to the digital world.
Correct. You mentioned about digital traits and you said many would have instincts that you probably don't have. One thing that we often encounter is nowadays, actually young journalists are coming straight to digital and not like you all who did with print and then move to television. So when they come directly to digital, they probably never enter a newsroom. They don't go through the grind of pitching a story and getting an approval and putting it on the cover. And in India, it was always said by editors that newsrooms are your biggest schools, and you forget what you learn in your journalism school, treat your newsroom as your school. So and because of that, because of this direct entry to news, and probably they are sending you the news from wherever they are, putting it up on the CMS, you are just editing based on what they have written, and the story goes live. In that process, do you think credibility is becoming, is somewhere we are losing the credibility in chaos?
Look, I think we had already lost the credibility amidst the chaos. So who are we to today point a finger at the young digital journalists and say, look, you guys didn't go through a newsroom, hence you're non-credible. But, and I always like to use a word, but I used to tell a lot of young journalists, even when they were coming into TV, that I actually benefited from my 6-7 years in print, because it taught me a certain discipline of, attending news meetings, pitching ideas, as you said, doing the hard legwork of building up sources, developing a story, understanding what makes news. So I think it was important for my generation who came from print to TV. I think we had a huge advantage. But I would, by contrast, say that a digital journalist who just comes and becomes a YouTuber overnight, I think he at times may lose some of the essence of news gathering. He may, or she may. But I've also seen some, they have other skills. They're so technologically friendly. They understand, they understand the speed, the effectiveness of working with a small team. They don't come with a camera assistant, a producer and all, as we used to go to in the 1990s. So they have other skills. So I refuse to, call this a generation gap between my generation and the younger generation and say, look, you didn't go through a newsroom. I do believe it's important to have a newsroom atmosphere at some stage in your career, but I can see the value of true independent journalism emerging out of many young YouTubers who come with less baggage. Remember, newsroom is also baggage. Newsroom gives you experience, but it also sort of, brings with it its own baggage. So maybe young YouTubers come with less baggage, even if they don't have the newsroom experience.
Great. You said you would be very excited in starting a digital CNN IBN if somebody goes with, there's a lot being talked about, and in this issue of skill development, a lot has been talked about mentorship and the role that Rajdeep Sardesai can probably play, and not only you, the entire top journalists that we have in India today. For example, 25-year-old Rajdeep Sardesai was actually, as you say, Daryl De Monte played a great role, and then Prannoy Roy took you to the field to cover election in 98, 99. You were on the screen with Prannoy Roy presenting the election. Do you think you all are doing enough to actually mentor the kids to graduate to be good journalists, like it was done earlier?
Wonderful question, Anirban, and I think that really you have hit what I think is one of the biggest failings in journalism today. I was from a blessed generation where editors actually sat with you and discussed stories with you and took you through the process from conceptualization to its eventual execution in print and even on television later. So I was blessed both at Times of India and later at NDTV to have the likes of Daryl De Monte, Dilip Padgaonkar at Times, and Radhika and Prannoy Roy and others at NDTV. And I tried to bring some of that when I was an editor at CNN IBN as well and at NDTV. But today, I don't think people have the time or don't make the time, because news editors have become news managers. So when you're always managing the environment rather than focusing on developing a story, I don't think you invest enough in young talent. And, it becomes a bit like a factory shop where people are coming in and out. And that's true of, I find, even of digital. I find a lot of digital people, young people in digital are not getting the requisite training at times. Many of them have come through journalism school. So maybe the journalism school has taught them some of the technical skills, but the journalistic skills sometimes go missing. And I do believe that mentorship is critical for any digital, any TV or any print platform. And every organization's responsibility is to create some kind of spaces for mentorship. Because if we don't, then we are being unfair to the next generation.
Great. There's a question from Shreyas, and he's asking you, where does Rajdeep Sardesai go in search of meaningful journalism? And I'll add my question to it also. Is being instinctive essential? I mean, one story from your book somewhere I read, it said that you went to cover the cricket match in South Africa and you met Nelson Mandela, and that was probably more important than the match that you covered, that interview with Nelson Mandela. So could you please shed some light on it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, I went to South Africa in the idea of hoping, this was 92, 93, the first test series after apartheid was over. So, Mr. Mandela was in the news. And I think it was important. I was going for that series because I wanted to bring the intersection between cricket and politics. So I think, journalists must always have, in that sense, the eye for a story. I mean, that is instinctive. Some people have it, some don't. I've seen, some journalists have this wonderful knack of finding stories. I remember more famously going to Pakistan in 96. Again, I was struggling to get a visa. So there was a cricket tour after many years. Under the guise of a cricket tour, I got the visa, but went there looking for Dawood's house. My aim in Karachi was somehow or the other catch Dawood Ibrahim and try and do an interview. We managed to reach up to the door of his house, or wherever his house supposedly was in Clifton. But we couldn't enter. The guards didn't allow us to enter. But, I guess at the end of the day, that's, breaking out of, you've got to have that instinct of on desire. I think it's a desire, hunger of going out, looking for stories. And that must never leave you. That is the basic attribute, I believe, of a journalist, the passion for going out there and looking for a story.
Great. And where do you go for meaningful journalism? I mean, the motivation to meaningful journalism.
That's a very tough question. It's a question which has become almost like a dharam sankat and an identity crisis for someone after 33 years. I don't know anymore, but I would like to believe that in my own way, every morning I look for what I call a Get Real India story. And I'll give you an example which has made me feel better. Davangere. The students last year came to call me. My son is a young doctor, so I sort of have a great affection now for young doctors. They rang me up and said they had not been paid their stipend for 1 year, even though they were fighting COVID. We took up the story. Davangere is in the middle of Karnataka, so it's not Bangalore, it's not a big city. They sent us their videos. One of my colleagues, Nabila, put all those videos together, and we put out their story. Others then followed, or at least a few other channels followed. We managed to get eventually those kids their stipend. Now I find that they haven't got their stipend again this year. So again, they sent me tweets. Social media is an important part of this revolution. They sent me tweets saying, look, this is the status. They sent me videos. Yesterday, we did a story on them. Now the opposition has taken it up in Karnataka, and hopefully in a few days' time, once again, they'll get stipends. So meaningful journalism, the sources of it can be enormous, as long as you genuinely want to do it. You see, you have to be clear that the Davangere story may not have the same TRP drawing power as a Sidhu. But Davangere is more important in terms of the number of lives it touches than Sidhu. So I think if we recognize that there are Get Real India stories of people whose lives need to be changed, and if we can contribute, whether through digital, through social, through TV, print, I refuse to keep barriers anymore. I believe we are in a multimedia, multi-platform, content-driven age where we should be agnostic about platforms. The platform should not matter. Those Davangere kids should be on social media, digital, TV, and print till enough pressure is brought to ensure they get their stipends. That, to my mind, is meaningful journalism. Meaningful journalism does not require a platform. It requires good content.
Great. Thank you, Shreyas, for your question. I mean, that reveals such a great story. One question that I had, and because you mentioned this story about the students, has it become easier to cover remote areas? Because earlier you had to send an OV van, but now, and then came the term for backpacks. Now mobile phone with internet connection is enough. So, and Arun Jaitley had once said, I remember, that the news media organizations spend more money on distribution than on content, and that is why the quality suffers. Do you think with digital that can be corrected, where you spend more on content, less on distribution and production, and then probably tell stories that are more meaningful?
Anirban, that's again a very good question. I'll give you an example again for listeners. I remember covering the Latur earthquake in 1993 as a print journalist. And my biggest challenge was how to tell the story, because all telex, even the basic telephone lines had all got disconnected. 150 kilometers away from Aurangabad. We had to come back, drive, and one telex machine was functioning in one corner of Aurangabad, and from there we told the story. So, it was a Herculean task. And this is pre-TV days. With TV, with OB Vans, things became a little easier.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. Therefore, that I think the value of this age is that you can now invest, if you really wanted, in content and less in distribution. You see, distribution had become the big sort of curse almost. I always says I used to say content is king, but distribution is God. Because unless you are distributed, what do you do? Right? So you ended up investing in sort of ensuring you are on all platforms. I think we will move from that to an era where eventually, because the platform doesn't matter, content now can be spread right across without worrying about distribution. However, I find that even on some of digital platforms, you do need a boost through your marketing, through other, you do need other elements, much less expensive. And therefore, I think at least you will be able to invest more in quality content. And I think as time goes on, differentiators will matter, and therefore quality will matter even more. I think you'll have a lot of low quality stuff, and you'll have a few high quality. You'll have a lot of low quality stuff that will have large viewership.
Correct.
And you'll have niche channels which will provide quality content. That's the sense I get going ahead.
Great. I want to go on and on, but Devashish is telling me that we are running out of time. So just two more questions for you. One is asked by Ashwini. Today we see a lot of paywalls. Newspapers are behind a paywall. A lot of video content that OTT players like Netflix, Amazon they are behind paywall. Will a journalist who has always been on mass television like being behind a paywall? I mean, will you be comfortable if you do a show where people will only get access to it if they pay for it?
Good question again. Ideally, no. Ideally, I believe information, news, content should be available to all. But I think we've got to be realistic also. And the realism is that what is my revenue model? And this is a challenge that I, while discussing with people in digital, also discuss. What is the biggest challenge of digital? If our challenge was distribution and also ensuring revenues through distribution, through cable, the biggest challenge is how do I ensure revenues through digital? And unless I'm able to get it through subscription, how else do I add on? Can I only rely on advertising? Maybe not. But in an ideal world, I would like no paywalls. I believe information should be available to the maximum number of people, and then they should be free to choose. Maybe they should volunteer. Maybe they should crowdsource and volunteer to pay. But Indians don't want to. You see, who wants to? We are so used to getting, and it happened with newspapers. Times of India finished the newspaper market in a way by, by making Times of India available for 1 rupee, because that meant it made it so difficult for anyone else to create an alternative model which was driven through the number of copies you sold. So in an ideal world, yes, no paywalls.
Great. Last question. So, I mean, you could have been a cricketer. I was a quizzer, and a lot of the time he was asked this question: which journalist has a crick info profile for himself? And it's you. And then you could be a lawyer, but you chose to be a journalist and stay as a journalist for long. What should happen to journalism for young, bright students to get into it?
Look, I still think that this is a great profession. And, if you have a passion for news, if you have a passion for current affairs, it still provides you a ringside view to the world around you. I feel privileged that over these 3 decades, I have witnessed this amazing transformation in this country. And I think if you want to be part of that journey as an observer, then there is no better profession in a way than journalism. It provides you that ringside view, but you have to be committed to that aspect of journalism. You don't get into, I think, I never saw journalism as business. I still don't. That's why maybe I'm uncomfortable in the new world, right? A new world does see, and somewhere I saw the transition. I've also been privileged to work with great organizations, whether it's Times of India, India Today, NDTV, Network 18. Now, not everyone gets that opportunity. And I think the future, and this is the last point I'd make, is I think one of the advantages of digital is that we are also seeing the true emergence possibly of digital media in regional languages much faster than we saw through print in the print age at least. I mean, they're coming into their own, and I think they're creating their own localized audiences. We are entering a hyper-local age as well. So I think that in a way will also provide a platform to a lot of young journalists who may not necessarily have the English speaking skills that we were expected to have at some stage, but now are very comfortable in their own skin, speaking in their own language. And I really respect and appreciate that, because I've always believed local regional journalists know much more than the Delhi-based English journalists. I have always relied on stringers, retainers who have spoken to me in their own languages, and I've learned much more from them than hanging around in Delhi. That's why whenever I go out of Delhi, you'll see a smile on my face, because I really find out so much more about this wonderful, diverse country. So if you want to discover India, journalism, not a bad way to do it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you.
My great pleasure, Anirban, Debashish, and to the entire team at FX. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.